everybody. In 2010, I would find myself unemployed, uninsured, and uninsurable. I was labeled a pre-existing condition at the ripe old age of 5 years old. Before I began kindergarten, I was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis. Many people still don't realize that children can acquire this disease, but I can assure you it's very real, very painful, and very debilitating. That label before kindergarten began would make it impossible for me to purchase insurance as an adult at any price or any deductible. So if you can think of the worst case scenario for someone that's unemployed, uninsured, it'd probably be getting sick, right? So that's exactly what happened. I began to have symptoms I had never had before. I was having increased pain, tiredness. I had just had the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I would pay out of pocket to see my doctor on several occasions, and this was considered a luxury at the time. She was aware of my situation. I think she was doing the best that she could as far as treatment, considering I was unable to afford any kind of testing. In the meantime, I would continue to get sicker. Google would become my go-to for medical, and I was not happy with what I was finding when I entered my symptoms. Over the months of 2010, I would become increasingly weaker. I had heard of a high-risk pool in Ohio, and I called the governor's office to get details. The high-risk pool did exist, and I'm assuming it's the same high-risk pool that's in the new bill that Trump Care just passed. The high-risk pool started with you getting a number or a ticket, and that was put into a hat or whatever, and it became a lottery. And if your number or your ticket was drawn, then you got the chance to be in the high-risk pool, which was $500 a month with a very, very high deductible. All right, I couldn't afford that, so that was not doable for me. I tried to acquire Medicaid since my income was at this point non-existent, and I was told by being single and not having children. By August of 2010, I was having horrid pain in all my joints, but there was a pain in my left side that was almost unbearable. The pain was so bad that I remember reaching over and grabbing my Bible. I'm not sure what I thought would happen. I think my hope was the amazing things in that book would somehow seep through and heal me. And I would lie on that Bible for weeks, hoping for a miracle. After several weeks or so of that pain not subsiding, I remember walking out on the deck around my home at 2 a.m. and I looked up to the night sky and I began to ask God to take me. If He couldn't heal me, could He please take me? Days later, I began to wonder why even God didn't find me worthy. I would continue to suffer until 3 a.m. on November the 1st, 2010. That evening, I began vomiting and couldn't stop. I was at this point, it was at this point that I decided to go to the hospital because I can't stand to vomit. And I realized at that point that God wasn't denying me, He was actually carrying me. In the ER, my hope was that they could give me some medicine and I could go home. And instead, they explained that I was several pints low in blood and I would need transfusions. And I was told my spleen was the size of a watermelon. It should be the size of my fist. That was the excruciating pain that I felt in my side. Not only was my spleen so enlarged and filled with blood, it was ready to rupture. It had also broken my ribs from the inside out. They said they were admitting me, and I explained I couldn't afford that, and the doctor said he felt it was a necessity. I asked him if I was going to die if I didn't stay. And he said, I don't know, maybe. I said, well, maybe I can stay a day or two. My first concern was with every test and injection was the cost. I thought about ways I could cut costs while I was there. The doctor told me I was malnourished. He told me to eat what I wanted, when I wanted, and I thought no doctor is ever gonna say this to me again. And food would be the only way that I could actually cut costs. So I ordered one chicken finger per meal because I figured it was the cheapest item on the menu. And for everybody thinking that food's included in your hospital bill, it's not. It's averages about $35 a meal, or at least it did at that time. So 2 days later, the doctor would tell me I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. I cried. I was angry. Then I ordered a cheeseburger and fries because I figured there's no way I could pay this bill now. It was later downgraded to stage 2, but the treatment was the same. Normally, that would have been the end of my care. I would be referred to an oncologist that I couldn't afford. Eventually, my spleen would rupture, and I would die. But this thing called the Affordable Care Act was on its way to being passed, and I would earn the chance to live. I had doctors that cared and some social workers that tried everything they could to find me coverage. Since disability was on a pill and some form of coverage was on its way through Affordable Care Act, I was approved for Medicaid. With the Affordable Care Act being fought against so hard, it would take several months for everything to go into effect. The doctors were providing care, the hospital was providing chemo, and I had to provide my medications. I finally was able to come home, and I remember I was being tired of sleeping on the floor because with chemo you get incredibly sick, and you never know when that's going to happen. So I put on a surgical mask, collected all my spare change, and began pouring it into the coin counter at Walmart. I was hoping there would be enough to buy my nausea medicine. Thankfully, there was. 6 months later, I beat that awful disease. But it was months after that before I actually received my insurance card. But I can tell you what a relief that was. It was overwhelming relief. Due to the Affordable Care Act and John Kasich expanding Medicaid, I got to give him props. I got to give him credit for that. I have been able to continue to have insurance. And I have to thank him for putting people over politics. Mike Turner, on his letter to me, would suggest I made a savings account. That was his letter. So I put my dime I had left in there for my medicine. Gave me a good start. Anyway, we're the only developed nation who doesn't have health care for everyone. I expect more from America, and I don't want to hear anyone else telling a story like mine ever again, because this can happen to anyone. Any of you out there, this can happen to any of you. I never thought this would happen to me. Healthcare is a privilege. Healthcare isn't a privilege, it's a right. No one has a right to live over someone else because they have money or feel they are more entitled. Everyone has worth, and no one deserves to suffer or die because of greed. Not anywhere, let alone in the United States of America. So I want to thank you for listening to my story, and I hope you will join me in demanding health care for everyone. NPR WISO did an interview with me a month or so ago, and that will be airing next week. So I was just going to ask you guys to watch for that. So thank you.